Let me open this floor now. I'd like for all of you to have the opportunity to ask a question to Dr. Ahluwalia. Please identify yourself and ask a short, crisp question.
This is what I'm going to count on you.
Yes, I will.
Where is the question?
Jerry. Could we have the mic to Jerry Hulton?
Hi, Jerry Hulton from New York City. So the Smart City program of the Modi government envisions 100 smart cities. Some have estimated the bill's $150 billion to accomplish this. To do that, looks like it needs a lot of private financing, and so my question is, what are the reforms you think are needed? I think there is a list. What would you say are the reforms needed to ensure that amount of private financing shows up, or will the government find a way to do it, and if so, how?
Yeah, I'm actually, in my family, it's my wife who does all the
I would say so. His
urban
wife
stuff.
is the expert.
I don't know. Let me step back a little. Of course, I mean, I can't speak for the government's program because I'm not, I have only as much information as you do. And I believe at the moment there's not enough known about the details. But I'm aware that if you're going to have 100 smart cities, unless you very clearly define what is a smart city, it's very difficult to cost. I guess, you know, my feeling is we need 100 livable cities in which smart is usually meant to mean bung in a bit of IT, and that's important. But, you know, for Indian cities, the most important thing about livability has to be water, sewerage, and solid waste management. How to bring this about requires both technology, organizational change, empowerment of the cities, and so on. Now, these are not ruled out in the sense that the Smart Cities program, along with various other government programs, et cetera, have windows for these things to come in. But what I don't know really is whether what we are funding is a composite plan to make a particular city capable of delivering a balanced end result. I think that's ideally what one should have, is one should fund an internally consistent program. And I don't know the details of what is being planned in that context. Certainly the amount of money that has been provided is only a very small part of what is needed. Now, you know, sometimes spokesmen say that this is going to come through public-private partnership. I welcome the public-private partnership, but I know that it is extremely difficult to create a policy that gives sufficient assurance to the private sector partner that you're actually going to deliver what you've promised. And it's not very clear who's going to give that assurance. Is it going to be the municipality, I mean, whose creditworthiness is usually zero, or is it going to be the state government, or is it going to be the central government? And I think these are issues that probably will surface in due course, and hopefully we get a response. But you know, the good news, I think, is that there is now a public awareness that we're making a mess of our cities. And you know, I mean, this was there even way back several years ago. The previous Prime Minister had said something about making Mumbai into Shanghai or what have you. And then there was, some people wondered that whether that's the exact parallel you want. Then there was an urban mission which ran for 10 years. Now you've got a broader conception. We need to see, you know, the details on that, basically. But it's good, I think, that we are focusing on the urban space. I mean, a lot of what needs to be done, if you're going to make climate change and all the rest of it manageable, has to be done in cities. I mean, 75% of India's GDP is going to come from cities within another 10 years. And half the population is going to live there. So it is not possible to have an Indian strategy which isn't a strategy for the urban areas. But from what experts tell me is that urban areas do not have the assured governance structure or the assured financial access needed in order to plan for the creation of the right infrastructure. And this is not something that the central government can resolve, because it really relates to devolution from the state government to the city. I mean, today, for example, in any of our states, the most important person to handle the urban problems of the state capital is the chief minister, not the mayor of the capital. And I think that's a real problem in the whole thing.
I just actually want to ask a follow-up question on this, is that, Delhi is now rated to be the most polluted, air-polluted city in the world. And this comes back again directly to how do we manage this, who will manage it, how will it get done? Do you see this issue being...
Sorry, what Delhi is going to?
We've signed a deal on climate change, but now we have this situation where Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world, and yet there is concern about how will this get addressed, and the issue of will the city do it, will the state do it, central government? How do you see this getting resolved?
I mean, that's clear, but in Delhi happens to be, the city is also Delhi state,
right,
although it's not a fully empowered state. So there's a sort of a division of responsibility.
Which creates its own problems.
I think if you had a 5 or 6 year plan for Delhi, it would be very clear what needs to be done. I mean, for example, you talked about pollution, and I take it you mean air pollution.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there's a lot of technical work that's been done, which, by the way, hadn't been done 2 years ago. What are the sources of pollution in Delhi?
Right.
And, it turns out that most of the pollution in Delhi is due to road dust and not due to vehicular pollution, although vehicles are pretty bad also. So if you sat down and said, what needs to be done, you get a whole variety of things which, people haven't thought about. Like, for example, one person who works on these things said, look, if you want to cut down road dust, you've got to go in for mechanical sweeping of roads and dusting, sprinkling water on them, which is what, you see that everywhere in the world, right? That would reduce the amount of dust thrown up by the other form of sweeping. Now, Niraj Chaudhary, in his book many, many years ago, has this wonderful description of the woman who would come in to clean their flat in Calcutta. And he said, she just comes and sweeps the floor and raises the dust, which then settles more evenly after she's left. It doesn't actually do anything, right? Now, this is just the story writ large as far as the city is concerned. But, for this, there are technical solutions, but they cost money. This is the real problem. I mean, if you ask me, Delhi is a rich city, and, Delhi should pay for this pollution control. But residents of Delhi are not at all aware. For example, the property tax in Delhi is a joke.
Yeah.
If you made a list of property taxes elsewhere as a percentage of property, and you made a list of property taxes in Delhi as a percentage of value of property, it's a complete joke. And yet, the Chief Minister of Delhi, I'm not sure whether he's saying this, but he say, well, where's the money going to come from? I'm going to demonstrate in front of the Lieutenant Governor's house. Look, I don't think that we can become the smartest city in the world and have someone else pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's economics.
I'm a resident of Delhi, so implicitly what I'm saying is that I would be willing to pay a higher property tax, essentially.
Hello. Hi, sir. Good evening. My name is Ishan Gera. I'm a senior correspondent at BC Circle. My question is regarding the fiscal deficit part. You said adding 10 to 20 basis points to the fiscal deficit won't make much of a difference if the growth is there. My question is, what about the quality of fiscal deficit? We've seen a scramble towards the end every time with divestments and everything. What are your comments about the quality of fiscal deficit, and how can the government work towards improving it?
What is the quality of the fiscal deficit, and how is the government?
Yeah, what are your comments about the quality of fiscal deficit? How can the government improve upon it?
How is the government managing it, and how can it improve upon it?
Well, this is, you're referring to the past or the future?
Future.
Well, I have no idea what the government is going to set as the fiscal deficit, so there's no way that I can tell you. But you know, look, it's not rocket science. I mean, if you want to control your deficit, there are only two ways of doing it: cut down your expenditure or raise the revenues. And if you decide to, if the government, I'm sure they're doing this already. There are lots of things you can do on both fronts, but I'm not prescribing what should be done at this stage, and I don't know what's being planned. So we have to wait and see what they do in the budget.
My question was more related
Sorry,
to
can we just limit to one question?
Okay, sorry.
We want the... Can we have the mic over there, please?
I'm not sure that I understood.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Ija from China. I think I really like your comments because I see that at your level, people are very clear that China is leading India on a very large scale, at least at this moment. So I find this very interesting because Chinese like to say we want to learn from Singapore too. So there's a lot of debates in China saying whether we should learn from the system. At the end of the result, that we don't want to learn from that because the high payment we cannot afford. There's 10 million official workers, officials in China. So my question is actually what India can learn from East Asian neighbors and what East Asian neighbors like China, Korea, Japan can learn from India. Thank you. In terms of economic development.
You mean what we can learn from East Asia and what they can learn from us? Well, the
And
second
also
one,
what China
I think,
can learn from India.
well,
That's an
I'm
interesting
counting
question.
China as part of East Asia in that sense. Well, what they can learn from us is best for them to decide. So I certainly wouldn't want to push anything we're doing. But what we can learn from them, yes, I think there's a lot. You know, one thing very clearly is that in setting goals, which otherwise make a lot of sense, I think most of the East Asian, certainly China and also the other East Asian countries, have managed to focus national attention on the achievement of certain goals, and then they've managed, I think, to implement that quite well. It's more difficult in India because of the nature of politics, but I mean that's the challenge. You know, how do you manage a democratic system which is, you know, which is usually characterized by generating criticism and controversy and so on. I mean, that's part of the name of the game. But somehow the trick must be that in the end, maybe you do things a little bit more slowly, but you get them done. And I think we need to find out what systems they have in place which actually allow them to move faster. My guess is that, you know, the role of the bureaucracy in facilitating what is a national goal is something which the East Asians have done much better. And I'm not saying that we have to do it exactly their way. But I think we do need to set in place both mechanisms and even some structural reforms that would actually enable the same thing to happen in India. It's a bit complex because one of the problems in India is that, I mean, because of the independence of the judiciary and the ability of people who want to stop something to go to the courts, and the fact that, you know, that needs to be respected, I think that's a dimension in which certain changes can clearly be held up. But, you know, to my mind, if we anticipate that and make whatever policies and changes we are making more firmly entrenched within the legal setup, so that then they are not easily challenged in court, I think that would help. And probably over time that is happening, actually. But, you know, it's taking more time, that's all.
I think that was, if I'm not mistaken, one of the questions Prime Minister VP Singh had asked you, what India can learn from Southeast Asia and what are they doing well, which sort of started the whole liberalization process.
Yes, he did actually, and I mean, I'm writing about this in my book, and I also talked about it. I mean, it did lead to me preparing a paper at
Right.
that time, which took a very integrated view, and that was discussed, and it was leaked, and a huge controversy. And I must tell you that in those days, the Planning Commission objected strongly.
I'm
Because
sure.
it did not like any competition to their supremacy in these areas. Said, who is this guy? Why is he talking about policy changes? But
It was taken very seriously, obviously. It was taken very seriously.
sorry, is
It was taken very seriously, this
that I
report
don't know.
that
It
you
was,
had. And
certainly it was used to generate phenomenal controversy. If that is a sign of seriousness, it was taken very seriously.
but they were
indeed.
supporters of it, and eventually it sort of laid the foundations.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think, I would put it this way. It was, I think one of the problems in our system is that we wrongly think that because we have a ministry for everything, the way to get something done is to tell the ministry to do it. Part of the purpose of my paper was that, you know, you need an integrated view in which several ministries have to cooperate to achieve a given objective, okay? We have a commerce ministry, for example, that used to, and still does, keep thinking of export incentives, but it never looked at the exchange rate. So you could have the finance ministry driving the exchange rate in a manner which made Indian exports utterly uncompetitive. And not a squeak from the commerce ministry or any of the export organizers. When I was commerce secretary, I used to make these, and one of the things we did was to make the exchange rate flexible. And I argued with one of the exporters who was saying, look, you've taken away this little incentive and that little thing, and we used to get interest at 2% less than the normal. And I said, look, what are you talking about? Yes, you used to get all that, but you now have an exchange rate that's 20% more favorable.
Right.
But they just didn't think of that as critical.
So silo
And there are
thinking.
hundreds of such examples where if you want to get something done in a particular dimension, administratively, the cabinet secretary or whoever it is will say, oh, that's the job of this ministry. But actually, it requires cooperation across several ministries. And ministries can keep on doing whatever they're doing, but they have zero power to get other ministries to do what is necessary. And as a result, there's an excessive focus on those instruments that they control and not enough focus on making the systemic change that will achieve the result. I mean, this is pretty obvious, but it's amazing. It still continues,
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Can we have the mic here, please?
Dr. Ahluwalia, I never thought that I would breathe the same air you're breathing. So we're so glad you're here.
I bet you haven't heard that before. Dr. Ahluwalia, I never thought I'd breathe the same air as you did. As you.
I apologize. I mean,
No, it's good. It's good air.
You can take this back to your
you're
wife.
lowering your standards, I'm afraid.
Dr. Ahluwalia, with your international stature and what you have done worldwide, and you have come back to India and then you have progressed this country to the next level. What are your frustrations? And it seems that there is always these roadblocks and we are still ambiguous as to which ministry and this. Who is the decision maker who can make this, literally be the rainmaker to make these things happen? Rather than we go another 10 years and we are sitting here and talking about this again and again.
That's a very good question. And I mean, the reason I decided to write my book is actually to try to give people a sense of how, in a functioning democracy, these issues play out. I know the World Bank has invented this concept of policy maker, which kind of gives the impression that there's some people who are supposed to make policies. The truth is that the system as a whole manages to adopt certain policies through some interaction of the political process, social, what you might call civil society, politics, administrators, technocrats, and whatever. And this varies according to stages of the country's development and so forth. So I really can't give you a good answer to your question. Now, mind you, I mean, in many countries, the most powerful country in the world, the United States, I mean, you have gridlock. Now, you know, they've taken the precaution of getting to that position at $50,000 per capita, which doesn't make that much difference. We sometimes have this problem, you know, at $1,500 per capita, which is a disaster. But how we're going to change this, I don't have a simple answer. But my feeling is, you know, if the public becomes aware that in the end, this is a problem and it's your responsibility, and we now measure the problem so that 2 years down the road, we will know whether you've succeeded or not, then political accountability will come into play. And you know, on these issues that you talked about, the air that I am breathing and you are temporarily breathing, you know, until very recently, people were not aware. Then we got this tremendous focus on China's polluted. And we all said, oh my goodness, that's what happens when you have rapid growth. And somebody said, oh, by the way, we're even worse than China. And people wouldn't believe that. But then it turned out, I mean, if you look at public focus on this subject, in India, about 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, some guy who wrote for the New York Times wrote his last article saying, look, I'm going to leave Delhi because I have little children. And I don't want to subject them to this terrible pollution. And then all of a sudden, I mean, initially the domestic reaction was the only people measuring air pollution were the American embassy. And people said, why should we listen to the American embassy? We should have our own monitors. Absolutely right, we should. And now we do. And they give you the same result. So, you know, my point is that this requires a certain, people have to be made aware. Even I'm shocked, by the way, by the number. I mean, for example, somebody has done an estimate of the cost of air pollution, okay? And the way they do that is they estimate what's the additional number of people who die because the pollution is X rather than some tolerable level Y. So you make an estimate that if air pollution goes from Y to X, what's the additional number of deaths, okay? Now, that's done through some technical process. Then you decide that what's the value of a life? And what they say is, I think the value of a life is either 100 times or 50 times the per capita income. So it's not, the value of life is not the same as what, say, an American would value. It's scaled to our own per capita income. So if the Americans value life at 50 times or 100 times their per capita income, we should be willing to value a life at 50 times or 100 times our per capita income. Now, if you do that, then the cost of air pollution is somewhere between 2.5% to 5% of GDP.
Wow.
GDP, right? Now, in other words, if you care about this, it's worth investing that much for the country as a whole. If you don't care about it, you keep having people living shorter lives. Now, I don't think that I was not aware of this number 6 months ago. Now, these things have to, factor in. Younger people will be shocked by it. Younger people will ask ministers, you're the chap in charge. This is the other problem. Who's in charge of air pollution? A study by the Institute of Technology has established that the largest source of air pollution is road dust. Now, the minister responsible for that has to be the guy who's responsible for cleaning up the roads. But he's being forced to use a technology where large numbers of people are sweeping the roads and just shifting the dust from one place to another. Whereas people are saying, look, if you want to run a city of 20 million people, then you better have mechanical road cleaners with water and so on to keep the dust down and vacuum it up and so on. For that, he needs a huge amount of money. And to get that huge amount of money, he needs to recast the entire budget. And then you have to ask the question, who's going to pay for it? Now, most of the cities will say that the smart cities mission should pay for it, which means the government of India should pay for it. I would say that, look, cities are richer than rural areas, and cities should pay for it. But then the cities will say that, look, you don't give us financial autonomy. And so that is, I know that by now what you must be thinking is I'm trying to evade the question. I'm actually trying to point out that the question is very complex, and India has yet to face up to it. I'll give you one very simple example of why I think China does so much better than we do. In 1987 or something like that, I was an official in Mr. Rajiv Gandhi's office, the Prime Minister's office, and he was visiting China. And it was the first visit that an Indian Prime Minister was making after a very long time. And I was part of the accompanied baggage, you might say. And when I looked at the itinerary, I said, what's this? I mean, he's going to Shanghai, and he's being given a dinner by the mayor of Shanghai. Who the hell is the mayor of Shanghai? So our embassy told me that, oh, by the way, that's Zhu Rongji. He's most likely going to be the next prime minister. Now, in India, there is no mayor anywhere who has the remotest chance of getting any kind of comparable political job. So it struck me that in China, the guys who run a city are politically very important guys. We don't do that. Our cities are run by bureaucrats. Now, having said that, you might ask, when is this going to change? Short answer is, I don't know. But frankly, until it changes big time, you cannot expect a comparable improvement. But most people are not yet aware of it. Most residents of Mumbai are not aware of the fact that, they vaguely think that the chief minister of Maharashtra is responsible. But remember, if you become chief minister of Maharashtra, there are umpteen cities in Maharashtra, to say nothing of the rural areas. And they're telling the chief minister, you're too much focused on Mumbai. So it's a real problem.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to wrap up the session. We want to thank Dr. Ahluwalia for your very provocative and honest comments. Thank you for taking the time.